Today, we have 5 experts in data resilience joining us to discuss the findings from the DRMM research and what organizations can do to increase their own resilience. Dr. George Westerman, Principal Scientist, MIT. George focuses on business transformation and was one of the pioneering researchers on digital transformation. Jeff Caso, McKensey. Jeff is one of the hard-hitting experts who worked on the DRMM project from day one, and he works with large and medium organizations in cyber resilience. Dave Russell, Head of Strategy with Veeam. Dave brings an enormous wealth of information from working with global customers every day. Michal Goldshtein from Palo Alto. She's the Director of Security Architecture and Research, and Michal focuses on security practices. And Vamshi Kamunini at Microsoft. Vamshi is the Head of Product for Azure Blob Storage and Storage Partnerships. And I'm Christine Benson, the VP of Global Product Marketing at Veeam. Thank you. Okay, so now, this is a very exciting announcement for Veeam, and let's start at the beginning. So, George, how do you define data resilience, and why does it matter to today's organizations?
I'm really delighted to be part of this research because all this digital transformation work, all this AI work that's happening, if your data is not right, if your systems aren't connected the right way, you can't do any of it. And so we've defined data resilience as being the ability to protect, recover, and manage important IT assets against events that you can't plan for. And the really important part that, it's certainly, Veeam is a part of this, but it's more than just backup and recovery. It's really trying to think across more holistically, across cybersecurity, across your architecture, across many other parts of what you are doing. So why is it important? Because, well, first of all, like I said, without having things running the right way, you can't do anything, but it's also important for another step. We're trying to get beyond the idea of just the recovery mindset and think about a resilience mindset, a resilience posture in organizations. So you design it right from the beginning, and then it's easier to protect and manage from there. So not only should you protect yourself from incidents, but you should be more efficient. You should be a little more agile than you were before if you get that into the very beginning.
Right. And Jeff, what are you seeing when you work with customers? What's going on in the industry?
Yeah, and just to build off the word that George used there, I think was really operative is design. This is not a simple problem with a simple solution. If it were a simple, you buy the right technology and now the problem goes away, then everyone in this room who's a customer of Veeam wouldn't have this problem anymore. But you think of security in terms of practices as well as technology. And the practices that are at risk here because of new and emerging threats and because of new and engaging digital models that are making business value more tied to the stake that's at risk when you have resilience at play, there's so much more here that we have to think about from day one when designing a system to make it resilient than just applying a Band-Aid or a patch later on.
Great. And Vamshi, did you want to add to that from your view?
Yeah, no, I think, the theme of design from the beginning is super relevant. Being in the cloud provider space for a long time, it's very hard to retrofit this stuff in later. You really have to think about, are you designed correctly? Have you kind of gamed it out? Have you done a couple of tabletop exercises? Have you, what does DR, what does failover look like, either from your on-prem to your cloud environment or, across cloud regions? I think really making sure you are not just ready, designed, but also preparing for that inevitable event. We all hope it doesn't happen, but when it does, we need to have a playbook for doing that. And across the board, whether it's a malicious attacker, actual infrastructure failure, or it's some other kind of unexpected event that you'll have to look at. I mean, one of the funny stories we have from hyperscaler land is, when we were starting to build out our data centers, 15 plus years ago, Azure went GA in 2010. We said, these multiple redundant power supplies in data centers never fail, right? You have 2 of them per rack, per row. They never really fail. And then we've had everything that can go wrong does go wrong eventually, right? We've had lightning strikes take out data centers. We've had fires in colos. We've had chiller failures, like all sorts of crazy stuff that you're like, this is a 1 in an X event, and 1 in an X will eventually happen at enough scale. So I think that's a really big part of resilience.
Yeah, true. At scale, it will happen eventually. Great. So our research found that over 30% of CIOs are overconfident in their resilience, often misjudging how they align with best practices. Dave, why do you think this confidence gap exists, and what should organizations do to protect themselves against it?
Yeah, oftentimes the C-level person is removed from day-to-day operations, so they're not really aware, to your point. Can those things really happen? It sounds theoretical, like can a squirrel really take down our entire data center by biting on a power line? The short answer is yes. If it's the right squirrel and the right power line, bad things happen. The other thing, though, bad things happen, a lot of times the CIO, he or she thinks that, well, I've got a superstar on my team. Superman or Superwoman can bail us out of things because they always have. That's not really a winning strategy, long-term, relying on the heroics. So part of the, key pillars we have to think about, especially from like a backup recovery perspective, that goes deeper into kind of the connective tissue of IT. Those aren't things that a CIO, a CEO, maybe now they're a little more aware, Christine, because of cyber and ransomware. Maybe now the board understands why backup and, of course, recovery can be vital. But a lot of those, echoing what Vamshi was saying, a lot of those practices were invisible because they largely worked. It works great until it doesn't work at all, right? And then suddenly it becomes critical. So part of that overconfidence is over-reliance on the heroics of the team, a belief that it worked fine yesterday, it won't happen tomorrow, and it's a false sense of security where unfortunately by the time the early warning indicators are there, they're really not that early.
That's true. Michelle, what are you seeing at Palo Alto?
So Dave, to add to your point, I think organizations are just happier not thinking about the worst case scenario, about a real incident, right? There's so many day-to-day problems that need to be solved, and these are the ones that get prioritized. Yeah. And from a security perspective, we need to remind organizations about the risk. And so we're seeing that the frequency, severity, and speed of attacks is growing. And so it's only a question of when they're going to be hit, and organizations need to prepare for that day. That preparation includes building a recovery plan and asking the hard questions to your team about the existence of such recovery plan. Now, once the plan is built, or if it has already been built, part of it is also asking for the plan to be well documented as well as validated.
Yes. Making sure your plan works is the biggest part of the plan. So, one of the things that Anand talked about this morning is that more than 74% of organizations in the DRMM research were not mature enough to meet the modern resilience demands. Remember, 1 and 2 horizons had 74% of the organizations in them. That leaves them exposed to revenue loss, operational risk, just a lot of brand damage, other things. Jeff, when you think about that, what are the most underestimated consequences of this immaturity?
Well, one of everyone's favorite problems, I'm sure, is trying to quantify the impact of risks like this and resilience loss. And it's really an enigma. And the deeper you go, it's like you try to measure the sand as it meets the water. And the deeper you go, the higher the number gets. But when you think about what really matters here in terms of impact, it's customer trust. We're talking about reputational damage. We can think about regulatory damage. But I think the real opportunity here for all of us as practitioners is to take this conversation about how you define risk and the types of impact that an incident could have, and how to use that as a bridge across the table to figure out how your objectives as resiliency leaders can help support the objectives of others. One example I like to give here is I was working with one organization where, well, they said, well, resiliency doesn't matter a whole lot to us because we do sales of big industrial parts. If our systems go down, we can do it over paper, and we can go a few days like that. Well, the reality is their business vision is to move entirely to e-commerce in 2 years from now. And in a world where all of their sales start and end on the internet instead of in a branch office somewhere, we're talking about a world where resiliency is more than just any of these individual risks together. It's your entire business. And so there's an opportunity to figure out how to go across the aisle or across the boardroom table when you're having these conversations about risks, because it's not just mitigating risk, but it's enabling business value and aspirations of your colleagues in your company.
Great. And Dave, did you want to add anything from what you're seeing in the market?
Yeah, just from what we've observed and by way of this study, data resilience has really risen up in terms of awareness. Maybe that's some of that cyber assisted. But to Jeff's point, every business is a digital business, is an online business. You may sell air conditioners, but you're transacting via the web, or there's some notion of where downtime is really not tolerated, or the downtime that you expect to be able to survive is much, much shorter, tighter window. So resilience has moved up from number 4 to number 2, only behind cost containment in terms of prioritization. Cost never goes out of style. It's like, that's always going to be an issue regardless of economic environment. But resilience is now understood to mean I don't have the ability or luxury to try to restore operations, which kind of implies that you have a downtime. It's almost I need to resume. I don't have the ability to take the hit of have a restore. So the ability to provide continuous services is becoming more and more important.
Super. Okay, shifting gears a little bit, compliance. So compliance requirements are placing really increased time-bound pressure on organizations. I'm sure many of us that are dealing with this every day. And there are real consequences to non-compliance. Thinking about compliance, George, when you're working with organizations, how do you counsel them on how to balance regulatory requirements with agility and ensuring that it doesn't become a blocker to their business growth?
Well, it's this general thing, right? That if you do security, if you do recovery, if you do compliance as something you think about after you've designed everything, then you're just asking for a nightmare. And certainly spaghetti is a heck of a lot harder to do anything with than lasagna would be, or even ravioli. So, that's why architecture and portability are so important here, because in the framework, we're trying to help to think about how do you design it right from the beginning rather than try to protect it later. It's interesting, though, especially when you get into the kind of environment we're talking about here, those backups can play dual role. And the portability can play dual role, because as long as it's sitting there, why not tag it there for security, for compliance reasons? Why not see whether things are there that shouldn't be there for security reasons, that kind of thing? So you can let that stuff that's just sitting there in storage actually be an active source of better compliance and security as you move on. I do want to say one other thing too, and that's this idea that, well, how did it get that way? We made bad decisions, whatever. Governance, we always think about governance, and especially in this compliance world, as kind of the brakes. Governance is a lot about saying, don't do that, don't do that, don't do that. And what we've seen in now 15 years of digital transformation research and 10 years of IT research before that, if you can think about governance not as the brakes, but as the steering wheel. So instead of saying no, you say, here's a better way. That's a tremendous way to set yourself up for better success later on.
That's interesting. So, Jeff, have you seen organizations adopt the steering wheel approach, and has that worked for them?
Yeah, you can adopt a steering wheel approach, but you also need to have a working car in order to
True.
be able to steer the car. And I think to some extent it's automation that keeps the machine moving forward, and the best step that you could take to enable compliance as a part of your resiliency standard is automate, automate, automate. And what we saw in the research was those Horizon 4 organizations, they were the ones that were using all of these sources of intelligence. They had the infotainment console in the car was there to tell them when to turn left, when to turn right, because they're able to use things like AI and these more advanced analytics to help guide with resiliency. But you can't jump from Horizon 1 to Horizon 4 without putting in place the necessary automation that ties your policies to your technical controls. And there's a lot of just core basic blocking and tackling there that many organizations struggle with. Like, how do you make sure you have 100% coverage of assets in your IT asset inventory and that everything is tied to an RTO? We found that less than half of companies in the survey had RTOs across their critical applications, and of those 50%, it was even less than 50% of those that were able to achieve the RTOs. So there's a long journey here to get to Horizon 4, but when you're there, I think you're in control.
That's a really good point. And we did see so many companies that didn't have the basic practices in place. And when you look at the very basic horizons, that's what it's asking you to do in the model. So there's a lot, as we talked about, there's a lot of room to really improve, to go from Horizon 1 to Horizon 2. And a lot of companies are still just at the very bottom horizon in basic. Okay, so we've seen real financial outcomes from resilience measures. $5 million saved per outage in healthcare, $500 saved per year in financial services, really documented savings and very positive outcomes from adopting the maturity model and improving on it. Jeff, when you think about the business case for resilience as a boardroom priority, is it a boardroom priority, or is it still just an IT function?
I've been talking a lot, so I'll go really quick and then turn it over to any of my partners who want to jump into the conversation. But I think when you think about the business case for resiliency, it's very easy in the boardroom to say this is an enterprise risk management topic, and therefore it affects everyone. And that's absolutely true, but a business case also is intended to show positive ROI. And where can you enable the business? And the best business cases that we've seen for building resiliency and disaster recovery programs, it's not just about the risk you buy down, but it's about the revenue generation capabilities you enable the business to achieve. But I'll turn it over.
Okay, George, do you want to add to that?
This is so important, right? Putting this in a language that they can understand rather than use. So, if you need something from somebody and you say, I need this, you may not get a response. But if you say, you need this, you want this, that's a whole different story. And so what you were saying, the returns are a tremendous way to do it. But it can also start from the language that you're using every day to talk to the business. Can you put it in a language that they care about, not the language you care about? And we've all learned over the years, right, that talking about how many nines you have is not all that useful. Flipping it around and talking about hours of downtime, that gets people's attention. And what else can you do in that same way to talk about the other things you've got? Whether it's the returns or the costs or whatever, in the language that the business people can relate to.
Super. So staying focused on leadership, in our research, we found that most mature organizations are nearly 50% more likely to have a chief resilience officer. I don't know if your organizations have done this, but it was a very interesting finding. Wondering, Dave, do you want to comment on what that says about leadership and where companies are investing?
Yeah, it's an old notion. You get what you measure, or you get what you reward. Like especially from a sales perspective, there's a reason you put a spiff or a bonus on something to incent behavior. So organizationally, if you signal to everyone else that this is important enough to put a high-level title, a C-level title, a VP, or whatever the case may be, it's telling the whole organization that you're taking it seriously. But it's also probably putting enough time and attention to do some of the things that everybody's been saying, which is to do something in advance, right? To take action proactively instead of reactively. You can't sort of test in quality. It has to already be present. You can test and find out there's errors, but then you've got to go do something with it. That's one of the things that always unnerved me when someone says we failed our disaster recovery tests. Well, not really. You just learned, hopefully, before you actually needed that. And if you go take action, all of a sudden now organizations with those formalized roles, higher chance that they actually have the resources to be able to go do something with that, versus organizations that really aren't there yet from that level of maturity. Their ability to respond, forget even being proactive, but to respond once they identify a problem may not be as high.
Great, great. Oops, sorry. Okay, so next, Michal, sorry. Automation and AI are transforming resilience strategies. Where do you see this impacting AI-driven resilience, and what should organizations be thinking about?
So there are a lot of opportunities for AI and automation. I would say that, first of all, having the data is key. So the visibility that everybody talks about, it's having the right data to be used during investigations. Then on the analytics that you can generate in order to have an enhanced detection capabilities, as well as a predefined, ready-to-use automated playbook that integrates all your response, all your processes in one single playbook is key. Now, obviously, automation and AI are significantly improving the speed of your response. In security, we often talk about 2 KPIs as key metrics: mean time to response, mean time to detect. And having this playbook would be exactly that, addressing incidents much quicker. In recent years, we've seen the significant drop from over a week to exfiltration to less than a day. So imagine what attackers are doing and compare that to what your security team is able to deliver in terms of response time, which is an average of 6 days. There is a significant gap, and organizations need a better way to scale their operations and address this gap. Playbooks are a significant part of it, and so having all your integrations in place, using your tools in a much better way, as well as integrating your processes. Now, we've talked about different aspects, but processes are really key. You have different teams involved, right? And especially when we talk about these types of incidents, bridging the gap between IT and security is also very important, especially once we talk about speed. So incorporating that in your playbook, as well as the ability to take automated action, will bring your organization closer to being much more resilient when an incident actually happens.
And how should they be using AI with those playbooks?
So your playbooks would hopefully be implementing and using AI as part of the technology you're using, and there are different ways to do that.
I see. Okay, great. And Jeff, you know, in the same vein, how do you see organizations playing into this with AI in what you've been doing?
Well, so I'm sure everyone's boardroom is talking about AI. And I think what that means, the good news for all of us, is AI requires resilience. And it's a great opportunity for us to restart the conversation, learn from the last time we tried to have the conversation, and pick it up again. But I also don't think that the way to bring resilience to support AI use cases is necessarily that you have to jump to AI-enabled resilience. You might have to start from Horizon 1 or Horizon 2 where you're at today and get some of those table stakes capabilities in place. There's a long journey for all of us to get to using AI in day-to-day resilience, but even like Michal was just talking about around the playbooks, if that's where we need to start, that's where we need to start. But the benefit of AI in the boardroom, it's a great opportunity for us all to reintroduce a conversation and start from where we need to start to get to what looks like a Horizon 4 capability in the future.
Great. And Vamshi, Microsoft has been doing a lot with AI. Do you want to comment on that as well?
Yeah, I think this notion of building blocks that both George and Jeff are talking about is really key. Right? Like, what can you do practically today for AI-driven resilience? I think this idea of getting the second copy of the data, someplace where the tools and systems can act on them, can process them, is really key. So even today, what you've heard about Veeam Vault and getting the data into Veeam Vault is a place. It's cloud hosted. It's in a place where you can crack the data and do things with it. So that's a key first step. That's sort of a Horizon 1 thing, as Jeff was saying. And then we can build a layer of services. That's something that Veeam and Microsoft have already been working on, is really saying, hey, the holy grail for backup and DR has always been, you have this rich source of the most critical data in your enterprise in your backup catalog. Why not crack it open and do something with it, right? So I think over time, you're going to see, as you bring that data in and keep a copy, it shouldn't probably be your only copy. It should be your second copy or something in the 3-2-1 system. But you can then start to say, hey, let me go scan that for PII. Let me go scan that for data that you need to kind of go do something with. and the systems are absolutely amazing. Like, it still blows my mind, like how fast we've moved in a couple of years. Even we're just scratching the surface with these, chat-based modalities, but how much better these systems are at digging through, large amounts of information and finding those needles in the haystack. I think we're all going to be very, very surprised at how well these foundation models that are being, trained and built are going to be able to go after a use case like this and say, hey, can you make my resilience posture better? Can you make my security posture better? Can you find where I'm exposed to compliance and regulatory risk, to an earlier question? So those things are coming, build by bringing that data where it is operable, and then you can go from there.
I mean, every day I think I'm pretty surprised and delighted with just what ChatGPT can do for us. So, okay, great. So cloud and hybrid environments are really introducing great new things, but also resilience risk, including vendor lock-in. Dave, when you think about this, what's the best approach for organizations who are modernizing their data strategy, but also they want to minimize their risk exposure?
Yeah, if you really think about what we're talking about in resiliency, it's like we're in the game of risk reduction. And to Michal's point, if it's 6 days a team can respond, but maybe 6 hours is the length of time you've got to actually be able to respond, there's just a huge impedance mismatch, right? So if you can reduce risk by going through a practical instrument like DRMM, where you don't have to go and now try to you don't have to go and get the expertise of all of these people here. You can go and use something that's pre-built, give you contextual information for your organization, not like going on the web and saying, WebMD, I have these 5 symptoms, what's gonna happen? And the answer is always, you might die. So that's not the greatest outcome, right? But if you can get an outcome that's tailored to your organization, we wanna reduce the friction with DRMM to getting the knowledge that you need. I mean, the first bit is just really accurately understanding where you're at. I think it was, just mentioned that sometimes, you can aspirationally want to get to level 4, but you might need to get to 1 and then journey upwards from that. So understanding how to do that, understanding, therefore, what should you go ask for? What do you talk to the board, the CIO, the CTO, you name it. You get more specific. So the biggest thing I always like to say with any research project is you owe it to yourself to get informed. But this research project is not generic. It's a bit of specific capabilities that really can be tailored to you, your organization, and where you're at today, so that you can have a better level conversation, so that you don't get the mismatch that was just mentioned of you don't have days.
Great.
Just to pick up on that, the team has created a really nice self-assessment that they can walk through with you and help you figure out where you are in these horizons. So it's not a matter of taking 6 months and having 100 analysts come in. You sit down, you go through this, you figure out where you are, and there's some pretty clear next steps from where you are. It's really interesting stuff.
Maybe a small note, Christine, if you don't mind. There's one tool that is part of this entire approach, which I don't think we spent enough talking about, and that's performing exercises. So to your point on overconfidence that organizations have, part of it is also not just preparing for that worst case scenario, but also understanding that you need to have that continuous process of really, to your point, Devon, asking yourself those hard questions, but also coming prepared to those board conversations. These conversations change. If you look at organizations that have been hit with an incident, all of a sudden they're doing a lot of the changes you're probably asking for. Other than personnel changes, they have increased budget, they are changing their processes, they're implementing new technology to help and prevent, hopefully, the next incident from coming to their organization. So doing those exercises and testing, by the way, 3 pillars, right? So you look at both people, processes, and technology, looking at everything from your configurations to actually having the right roles and responsibilities of your crisis team. So a lot of those questions that seem, for some of you, trivial, for others, way more advanced that you might have prepared for, but having those real conversations with your teams, answering those questions, will lead to a much more real conversation with leadership where you actually know where you stand. This is not just overconfidence, but rather you've done the test, these is the results, and then you go ahead and you implement the lessons learned. And I feel like out of a lot of great advice, that is also part of transitioning to those Horizon 3, Horizon 4, which is what organizations want to be aware.
Absolutely. So I would like to ask the panel now, of the things that we covered today, what are the things that we should have covered, that we didn't cover? Did we miss anything? What would you like to add about data resilience? What is a lesson, a takeaway? And we'll put George on the spot first. George.
Unplanned questions, that's always a good thing,
yes.
Right? For me, the key takeaway from this research and from what we've been talking about is just being clear on what's really happening. Where are you really? What's really happening? Because then you can start to make plans to move forward. But if you're just going to rely on what you think is happening, then you may be part of that 30% that is way worse than you think you are. So get clear on where things are, and then you can take the next steps.
Great. Yamshi?
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And I think for me, the key takeaway is really kind of making sure you think through your strategy about your data resiliency, data recovery, ransomware. Like, I think, despite all this, like the number of times, I can't name names, but number of times people reach out to us as cloud providers and say, hey, we were attacked. We need help with recovery, and they've never done a tabletop exercise, right? I think Michal was kind of getting to that as well. They've never sort of said, what happens when, real shit hits the fan, and you're like, well, how do I recover? Like, it's really kind of being intentional and planful about that, and then fixing the gaps. I mean, we all have gaps. I mean, even us as cloud providers have gaps. When we do these exercises, we find, oh, carp, we should have covered that off. So I think that if we take one thing away, it's going back and saying, what happens when this type of incident or that kind of incident happens, where resilience is super key and important. I think that would be a good takeaway.
If we're going down the line, then
yes.
Then what really stood out to me in the research was just the extent of the benefit if you do achieve this vision of Horizon 4 and 7x faster recovery time from resiliency issues and outages. The benefits are staggering, really, but I think it's how do you meet your organization where they are today in the next steps that you chart a course for? Because everyone can agree 7x faster recovery it's a noble aspiration to look towards, but it doesn't mean that's where you're going to get in the next quarter. And thinking very realistically, how do I take my organization along for the ride, I think is the look in the mirror, have the conversation about where we are today and who are the allies that you need in the organization. The best part about resiliency is there's no one in an organization who can say that we don't need resiliency. We're all on the same side of the table. It's a matter of how fast and how far.
And getting those teams aligned, right? Getting them in the room, getting them aligned.
And this is a great tool to be able to reset that alignment.
Yep, absolutely.
Brilliant. I like that. I'm going to dovetail on that and try to sneak in too rapidly. If you're a practitioner, you probably already have a lot of good ideas and awareness of where the exposures may lie, but it maybe was seen as a deferrable, or we'll get to that later. This model is a way to surface up some of that, because it's very rare that really the entire organization didn't think that there was an exposure. Probably not the case, but this gives a voice to surface more of those items. If you're at the exec level, I always like to say you can't do everything, but you can do something. Better to the point of this model can help identify what should that something be, right? Lower your risk to going and taking the right kind of action sooner.
So I think that I kind of added some things earlier, but I really think that to the points that have been mentioned earlier, this is a journey. And I think that overall, coming from a security background, the risk is there. There are so many facts. We all hear the news, the headlines about organizations that have been hit. The objective should be, how do you increase the overall resiliency of your organization? And to different organizations, this means different things. Use the model to help guide you to how can you increase your resiliency over time. Think of it as an iteration, and it's just continuous investment, but based off of real results that you're seeing from questions, sometimes hard questions you're asking, and working across all levels to try to mitigate the threats and address the risks that are obviously out there.
Fantastic. So now I'll turn it over and we can answer any questions that you guys might have. Yes? We would very much like that. So, and that's one of the reasons we have a consortium who put the model together and is giving different views on the model. So yes. Anybody else? No other questions? Okay.
Oh, one over there.
Sorry.
Is this available, like, to read through? It's a questionnaire. Is that available?
It's there. The ebook is available to anyone that explains how the model works. And the model is delivered either through a workshop or through a consulting engagement. But we can send you the link for the ebook. Actually, we can turn to the last slide, and there is a QR code for the ebook. So.
Go ahead.
How do you reconcile the need for AI, the cost of AI yearly, and the budget we have to increase yearly in cyber resilience? It seems that at some point it's worrying.
Yeah, it's a good question. And I think the way I think about it is we're still very much in an early innings for AI, and a lot of folks across the industry are designing and competing hard to lower the cost of entry and to lower the cost of these models and lower the cost of per n million tokens or whatever. I think you're going to see things get drastically cheaper in the next 2 to 5 years, right? You're not going to be like, it's not going to be steady. It's going to be these big step function jumps. We're doing a bunch of work, for example, in vector databases, and that's one that's hideously expensive today between the embeddings and GPUs used for embeddings, and then keeping everything in memory, right? There, not just us in Azure, but other folks in the industry are looking at how you can make these vector databases way more scalable, use cheaper forms of storage, use faster models for embedding generation. So I think in a large way, like I would encourage you, even if cost is a stumbling block today, to look a little bit further down the pike and say, hey, just like every other industry trend in our industry of things being driven down 90, 95, 98%, and then driven down another 90, 95, 98%, I think you're going to see that happen almost inevitably. It'll take some time, but I think you'll see that happen.
Anybody else? It's hard for me to see, so if I don't see you, yell at me. Okay.
One back there.
No, there's another one. Oh, okay.
Was there one back there?
Yes, sir.
Oh, no. Okay. Cool.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you, everyone. If you have any more questions, the panelists are here. Thank you.